So I love this term globally engaged learning and global engagement because I've been working for a while on this idea of a globally entangled history of music. So what does that look like in the classroom? It's I feel like I'm inventing it as I go. There's lots of scholarly material out there, very current scholarly research looking at global histories of music. It hasn't made it into the textbooks yet. It hasn't made it into the classroom yet. It certainly hasn't made it down to the secondary school level yet. So I feel like I'm introducing my students for the first time to this idea that music history is the whole globe of music history. It's the whole world of music history. And that even though for practical reasons or for disciplinary reasons, focusing on a certain part of the world or a certain section of time makes sense, but you never want to pretend that that happened in a vacuum.
I think if we are talking about global engagement, I think it's understanding and finding out about what goes on elsewhere than just in our small space that we occupy. And not just about knowing about what's going on, but also understanding what's going on as well.
It's about being comfortable, getting uncomfortable. It's about that cultural humility. It's about decolonizing the classroom. It is about that anti-racist lens, trying to make the material, the classroom, as accessible as possible, as accommodating as possible for students to invite a new kind of learning.
Now, in a classroom, I think global engagement would be, if we want to progress, then we need to equip our future generational leaders with an education that includes engagement, not just exposure to multiple perspectives on these inescapable global problems, but promoting equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the classroom so that, we could bridge divides and mutually benefit from the thinking and talent of other students with whom our individual and collective future are inevitably or intricately linked. And it also gives a voice to each student regardless of class, identified gender, identified race, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, or educational background. And this inclusivity really fosters a successful learning environment.
All right, so in my classroom, I think it's imperative that the Canadian students work collaboratively with international students to address contemporary business problems, because that is what they will be doing throughout their career. It's not that after they graduate from the Smith School of Business, they will be isolating within the bubble of North American business. Business problems are addressed differently from throughout the world, and the best time to start acclimatizing our students to that is right here, right now.
Yeah, so I think that for myself, how I think global engagement can be kind of enacted is a little bit challenging per se in the field where I'm coming from. So a lot of my background is in anatomy, and so more so of the physical sciences. And so I think that how people may currently be perceiving global engagement is that it's very content focused. So potentially representing more or having more cultural diversity in the perspectives that are being taught and et cetera. But as more of the physical sciences like you have with anatomy, they're not necessarily always going to change. They are kind of more constant. And so instead of maybe focusing on changing that content, you could consider incorporating additional aspects and skills and even the communication of those skills to the field. And so thinking about how people that learn anatomy will use that inevitably within medical school or professional degrees, et cetera. And so understanding how they can garner more skills to deal with a global population instead of just maybe a very particular Western one, which I think a lot of what we're currently being taught is geared towards. And so, for example, even we talk about jaundice, for example, in Caucasian populations. And the signs of jaundice in Caucasian populations are what students know, but they don't know how to extrapolate that into other ethnicities. And so even just those kind of small things that we take for granted are going to build into larger places when people actually have to go into practice. And so I think it's just more of the additional skills in the physical sciences that we can continue to work on to capture global engagement.
I think for me, what it looks like in the classroom, it's about bringing in ways of knowing, being, and seeing that have been historically marginalized. So that is global engagement. So it's not just about making sure we're working with diverse knowledges, but it's specifically with the types of knowledges, the types of ways of being of peoples who have been dispossessed of their knowledges, of their lands, helps us to better understand what is happening in our own community, whether it's around settler colonialism and land dispossession, or it's about migration issues, about climate change, about immigration, about caste oppression, about anti-Black racism. I don't think that any of these big issues that we talk about happen in a localized vacuum, and we can't actually talk about them in the local context without thinking about them and understanding them within global contexts. Especially when you're working in a faculty of education, where one of the things we tell our students, especially Ontario students, is that they are working in increasingly diverse classrooms where the students do not predominantly look like them. And I think that's true for higher education as well. And so what does that mean, actually? Ideally, it would mean that our teachers would also possess those diverse knowledges themselves and also have those backgrounds, ideally. But that's actually not the case. What does that look like then? I think it looks like bringing these knowledges into our classrooms in different ways. And so I don't think that we can talk, for example, about climate change and not talk about the role that global North countries, G7 countries in particular, have in exacerbating the issue and continue to do so. Global engagement is about, for those in the global North, taking responsibility for what has been a really privileged position and thinking through how we have allowed that the vast wealth that we have accumulated through the dispossession of others to really affect inequities throughout the world.